The 2026 WNBA draft has not happened yet, but the strategic decisions being made right now, pick by pick, projection by projection, are already telling a story that goes far beyond which prospect lands with which team. This draft class is being assembled as a direct response to one player. Every front office conversation, every philosophical debate about talent versus fit, every bet on college chemistry or international scouting pipelines, it all orbits around the same unavoidable question. How do you build a team that can actually compete when Caitlin Clark is on the floor? Because here is the reality that every general manager in this league is calculating in private, but nobody is saying out loud on camera. The 2026 WNBA draft is not just a talent acquisition exercise, it is a strategic referendum on how franchises intend to position themselves in the Clark era. And the projections emerging right now from analysts embedded inside the league ecosystem reveal exactly which teams have a plan and which ones are hoping luck does the work for them. Today we are breaking down the 2026 draft landscape with one specific lens. Who is building to beat Caitlin Clark? We are talking about Dallas's calculated gamble on college chemistry, Minnesota's European pipeline play, Washington's quiet dynasty construction, Chicago's locker room chess match, and the one pick to the Connecticut Sun that a content creator close to the league described on the record as being made purely for drama. Drama designed specifically to light a fire at Indiana's doorstep. If this kind of investigative framework is the reason you keep coming back, hit that like button right now and stay locked in, because this goes far deeper than any mock draft you have seen this week. Let's start with the pick generating the most strategic conversation in league circles. Number 1, overall to the Dallas Wings. The projection has Azzi Fudd heading to Dallas, and when you understand the reasoning behind it, you start to see the full scope of what the Wings are actually attempting to build. Dallas has publicly committed to building their franchise around Paige Bueckers. This is not speculation or rumor territory. The organization came out and stated it directly. Bueckers is the cornerstone. So the draft strategy at number 1 becomes an engineering question. Who complements her playmaking at the highest level? Who collapses the development timeline that typically keeps young rosters from being competitive? Who gives Bueckers in year 1 what most stars take 3 seasons to find? The answer Dallas is chasing is Azzi Fudd from UConn. And if you understand basketball chemistry, you understand exactly why. Fudd and Bueckers were not just college teammates. They were championship partners across multiple seasons. They spent years building the kind of instinctive, on-court communication, the spatial reads, the timing intuitions, the trust in pressure moments that professional training camps cannot manufacture in a summer. That level of chemistry takes years to develop from scratch. Dallas would be acquiring it pre-built, at the top of the draft. The strategic tension analysts are watching is real. The WNBA has buried plenty of college teammates who could not translate their magic to the professional game. The reads that felt automatic in college get disrupted when the defense is smarter. The rotations are faster, and the scouting reports are thicker. Pairing Fudd and Bueckers is a bet, but it is a calculated, evidence-backed bet, not a desperate one. And if it pays off, the implications for Caitlin Clark's competitive landscape are significant. A young, explosive, offensively dynamic backcourt in Dallas, operating on national television, generating the kind of rivalry narrative that drives ratings, becomes the most threatening rival to Indiana's dominance of the WNBA's public conversation. Dallas is not just drafting a player, they are engineering a storyline opponent. And credible rivals are the most valuable asset in professional sports because they elevate every game on the schedule. This decision carries added weight when you factor in the CBA landscape. The new collective bargaining agreement has restructured the WNBA's financial environment in ways that ripple through every roster move. Higher maximum salaries mean established veterans are harder to acquire without gutting your cap. That reality pushes smart franchises toward building through the draft with precision, and it raises the cost of every missed pick. Dallas's number 1 projection reflects an organization trying to solve its most expensive problem, the cost of chemistry, by buying it at the draft, where it comes cheaper than free agency ever allows. Meanwhile, Minnesota is making a radically different kind of bet at number 2. The projection has the Lynx selecting Maria Awosika, a 19-year-old 6'4" forward from Spain who turned heads during Team USA's international competition cycle. Awosika is not a ready-now player. That is not a criticism. That is the entire strategic point. Minnesota has Nafisa Collier. They have Kayla McBride. They have Cheryl Reeve, one of the sharpest coaching minds in the league. They do not need their draft pick to be an immediate contributor. What they need is a long-term asset who costs a high pick now and pays dividends 3 to 4 years down the road. When the roster around her has shifted, the league has evolved, and she has grown into the player her physical profile has always suggested she could become. The execution plan, stash Awosika overseas for a development season or two, let her compete against professional competition in a European League environment, against athletes who will expose her weaknesses and force accelerated growth. Then bring her over when the WNBA stage is appropriate for where she actually is as a player. This is the NBA stash strategy, and the WNBA is only now beginning to embrace it systematically. For years, the league operated under the assumption that every roster spot had to generate immediate production because resources were tight and patience was thin. The new financial environment has changed that calculus. Teams with veteran cores and deep coaching staffs can afford to plant seeds that bloom in year 3. Teams that learn to do this first will have access to a talent tier that later adopters cannot reach. For Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever, this matters in a way that extends beyond any single-season matchup. Minnesota is already one of Indiana's most credible conference threats. A Lynx roster that adds Awosika's eventual physical development to a core anchored by Collier is a team that becomes measurably harder to handle as Clark's prime window progresses. That window is not infinite. Every team developing correctly inside it is compressing the Fever's probability of capitalizing on it. Washington's approach at number 4 adds another layer. The Mystics' projection has Lauren Betts arriving to anchor a front court alongside a roster that already includes Lucy Olson at point, Sonia Citron on the wing, Georgia Amour providing scoring off the bench, and Aliyah Edwards anchoring the defense. Analysts covering the Eastern Conference have described this projected Washington core as a legitimate championship-caliber roster with a significant development qualifier attached. Building a contender through the draft is harder than projections make it look. Development is non-linear. Not every highly touted prospect reaches her ceiling at the professional level. Not every group of talented young players naturally coheres into a functional team. The Mystics are making a high-conviction developmental bet, and their timeline, 3 to 5 years, positions that bet squarely inside Caitlin Clark's competitive prime. Washington is playing the long game with extraordinary deliberateness. They are constructing a roster they believe will peak at exactly the moment when competing with the Indiana Fever matters most. That kind of organizational patience is rare. It is also a direct competitive threat to Indiana that shows up in no current power ranking. Over in Chicago, the Sky's situation at number 5 reveals something that every front office factors in but almost never discusses publicly. Sometimes the most important draft decision is who you pass on. The projection has Chicago selecting Tonika Powell from South Carolina, a versatile scorer who was leading her conference in production at Florida before her transfer to a powerhouse program that naturally compressed her usage. The ceiling projections on Powell are legitimate, but the more revealing part of this draft story is not who Chicago selects. It is who they reportedly steer around. Kiki Eriofen, a prospect that multiple evaluators have graded as a top 5 talent, is projected to land elsewhere. The reported reason: Eriofen has history with Angel Reese. And if Reese remains in Chicago at the time of the draft, the locker room calculus simply does not work. You do not draft a player with documented friction against your franchise cornerstone, regardless of the talent differential. This tells you something essential about how the most sophisticated organizations in this league are operating. Culture is not a soft concept. It is a measurable competitive variable. Locker room dysfunction costs wins. Wins cost playoff positioning. And in a league where roster spots are limited, the cost of a wasted lottery pick on chemistry mismatch is enormous. The smart franchises treat compatibility as seriously as talent, sometimes more so. That philosophy, incidentally, plays directly to Indiana's institutional advantage. The Fever's culture under Clark, disciplined, outcome-oriented, built around a player who raises the competitive expectation in every practice and every game, is one of the organizational assets that does not show up in any draft model. The teams chasing Indiana on talent still have to catch Indiana on culture, and that is a race without shortcuts. Before we get to the Connecticut pick that sent ripples through every Fever fan community online, the selection that was described in plain language as a deliberate targeting of the Fever-Clark storyline, we need to understand the global forces that are reshaping how every pick in this draft class gets evaluated. Because the international dimension of the 2026 class is not a sidebar. It is the central strategic story of this entire draft cycle. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Which team in this draft class do you think poses the single biggest long-term threat to Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever? We read every comment, and the answer you give might be very different by the time we finished this video. The new WNBA CBA has done something that quietly reshapes every calculation in this draft. It has made the league financially competitive enough that young international players, prospects still in their developmental years, who previously would have committed to European leagues for the long term, are now genuinely considering the WNBA as a primary destination, not a backup plan, a first choice. This matters enormously for how you evaluate the 2026 draft class, because the talent pool feeding into this draft is wider and deeper than any class that came before it. For the first time, WNBA front offices are not just competing against each other for the best available college talent. They are competing against EuroLeague clubs, against Spanish Liga Femenina contracts, against the entire global professional basketball marketplace. And the ones winning those competitions are landing prospects at the top of the draft who represent a completely different developmental ceiling than domestic-only classes offered in previous years. Awosika at 2 is one data point, but look further down the board. The Portland Fire are projected to select Marta Suarez at 7, another international prospect who has been making noise in the NCAA tournament cycle with consistent high-level play that has scouts tracking her trajectory closely. And Connecticut, coming back around at 15, is projected to take Leila Lakhan from France, 19 years old, another prospect who would not have been a realistic WNBA target under the previous financial structure. 3 international prospects in the top 15 picks of a single draft class is not a coincidence. It is a directional signal. The WNBA is following the same globalization arc that the NBA traveled over the past 2 decades, and the franchises that are building international scouting infrastructure right now are going to have a systematic advantage over the ones who recognize the trend 5 years too late. For Indiana specifically, this international wave has a distinct strategic implication. The players being drafted globally tend to be built differently than domestic prospects, longer athletically, developed in systems that emphasize movement and spacing, often physically more prepared for professional contact than their collegiate counterparts. They also arrive without the locker room baggage that can follow high-profile American prospects. They are wildcards in the most productive sense of the word, and some of them, 3 years from now, will be Caitlin Clark's most difficult defensive assignments. Now, Connecticut Sun, pick 12, Cody McMahon from Ohio State. Let's be precise about why this pick functions differently than every other selection in this first round. An analyst close to the process was direct about the framing. McMahon going to Connecticut was described, in plain terms, as being made purely for drama, not primarily as a basketball fit decision, not primarily as a system alignment calculation, as a narrative play. Here is why that framing lands with such weight. McMahon played her collegiate career at Ohio State. Ohio State operates as a direct conference rival to the University of Iowa, Caitlin Clark's school. For years, Ohio State's program competed in the same division as Iowa Z, ran into the same bracket placements, and lived in the media shadow of Clark's record-breaking run through college basketball. The Ohio State-Iowa fanbase dynamic is not polite. It is real, sustained, and emotionally charged. The Connecticut Sun, meanwhile, carry arguably the most documented organizational friction with the Indiana fever of any team in the Eastern Conference. Their rivalry runs deeper than individual games or box scores. It is built on competitive history, fanbase intensity, and a layer of tension that did not start with any single incident and will not end with any single resolution. Now you combine those two narrative threads. You take a player from Ohio State, Clark's rival program, and you put her in Connecticut, Clark's rival organization. Before McMahon has ever played a professional minute, before she has ever pulled on a Sun jersey in a game that counts, you have already generated a storyline that every WNBA media outlet will amplify, that every fan community will react to, and that Caitlin Clark will eventually have to navigate on the court with real consequences. This is franchise brand strategy fused with roster construction in a way the WNBA has not fully seen before. Teams are beginning to understand that the rivalries they engineer in the draft room have value that extends beyond the basketball court. Narrative assets drive viewership. Storylines drive social media engagement. Engagement drives broadcast value. And broadcast value, in the new CBA environment, is the metric that funds everything else. Connecticut is not just drafting a player at 12. They are purchasing a chapter of the most commercially valuable rivalry in women's professional basketball. That is a calculated investment, not an accident. Real quick, if this kind of investigative breakdown of the league's hidden strategic dynamics is why you keep coming back, consider joining the channel as a member. Your support is what keeps us doing this research at this depth. Hit that join button below and let's keep going deeper. The basketball question that follows the narrative question is equally important. McMahon has to be able to back up the storyline on the court. A drama play that results in a bust is just a wasted pick with entertaining packaging. If McMahon can contribute at the professional level, if she can carve out a rotation role in Connecticut's system while the Fever-Sun rivalry escalates in significance, then the pick becomes genuinely dangerous for Indiana. Because the most effective rivals are the ones who can actually compete. The Indiana front office will be watching this selection closely, and they will be watching how McMahon develops. Because every player who turns a narrative storyline into a performance legitimacy is one more pressure point the Fever have to account for. If you have not subscribed yet, this is your reminder. Hit that button and turn on notifications. Because this story is evolving fast, and you will want front row access when the next chapter breaks. Now let's pull back to the biggest macro variable that makes every single projection we have discussed. Dallas, Minnesota, Washington, Connecticut, all of it, potentially irrelevant, the 2026 free agency period. Multiple analysts flagging the 2026 WNBA offseason have described what is coming as the most volatile free agent cycle in the league's history. The new CBA has structurally freed up player movement in ways the old agreement never did. Veterans have more leverage, teams have more cap flexibility, and the combination of those two forces creates an environment where the roster you see today could look completely unrecognizable by the time draft night arrives. Dallas might not be building around Paige Bueckers if a competing offer changes her decision-making calculus before the season ends. Minnesota's Collier-McBride veteran core, which gives the Awosika developmental pick its entire strategic logic, could shift through trade activity targeting younger assets. Chicago might have already moved Angel Reese, in which case every locker room chemistry calculation we discussed around the Sky's fifth pick resets entirely. Seattle's roster construction, which shapes the Olivia Miles pick at 3 dice, is already in flux with ongoing uncertainty around the team's guard situation. You are projecting on a foundation that is actively shifting, Every assumption embedded in this draft class analysis could be invalidated by a single free agency decision in January or February. You are building analytical castles on a shoreline. That is not a failure of analysis. That is the fundamental complexity of operating in a league that is moving this fast. And here is the analytical frame that makes navigating that uncertainty possible. When you cannot know exactly what rosters will look like, you evaluate picks based on their logic across multiple scenarios. You look for the selections that make sense, whether or not a key veteran stays, whether or not a trade reshapes the roster, whether or not a coaching change introduces a new system. The picks that survive that stress test are the ones that reveal genuine organizational conviction. By that standard, Minnesota's investment in Awosika holds up across almost any free agency scenario because a developmental international asset with her physical profile has value regardless of what the veteran core around her looks like. Dallas's pursuit of Fudd holds up if Bueckers stays, which the organizational rhetoric strongly suggests. Washington's bet on Betts holds up because the Mystics are building from youth regardless of what any single veteran does. Connecticut's McMahon pick holds up because the Sun Fever rivalry is not going anywhere. If anything, it intensifies every season. And this brings us to the forward-looking reality that closes out this analysis. The 2026 draft is splitting WNBA franchises into two philosophical camps. Camp 1 runs on speed and chemistry. You acquire players who already fit your system, who already know your star, who can compress the development timeline and make you competitive before the rival franchises have finished building. You sacrifice developmental ceiling for certainty of contribution. Camp 2 runs on patience and global reach. You take the 19-year-old from Spain, you draft the French prospect at 15, you accept a delayed return and trust that your organization can develop talent in a way that compounds over time. Both camps can produce champions. The question is timing. And the timing question in this specific draft cycle has a very specific answer. Every team in this league that wants to win a championship in the next 4 to 6 years is building around one unavoidable variable, the window defined by Caitlin Clark's peak. Dallas is racing to match her speed. Minnesota is building a global pipeline designed to outlast her prime. Washington is constructing a championship core with her timeline in mind. And Connecticut just threw a lit match directly at Indiana's front door. The draft has not happened. Free agency has not reshuffled the board. But the intentions of these franchises, laid out pick by pick, philosophy by philosophy, are visible right now in real time. And every single intention points in the same direction, straight at number 22. If this investigation into the 2026 WNBA draft landscape opened your eyes to what is actually happening beneath the surface of league strategy, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, because we are tracking every development from here to draft night and beyond. The next video breaks down why the 2026 free agency class could create a scenario that even the most confident Fever fans are not prepared for. You do not want to be behind on that one. We will see you there.